The problem was simple. At least that was what humanity claimed. A single page of equations, written in a human child's notebook, had been uploaded to the Galactic Science Network as part of an educational outreach initiative. The intention was innocent enough. Human students, particularly younger ones, often struggled with motivation, so the Terran Academy Board had decided to showcase their basic assignments to the wider galactic community. They thought it would be a fun exchange of knowledge. They were wrong. The moment the problem set went live, the greatest minds of the Galactic Science Council took notice. It began with simple curiosity. A Zelvori physicist, renowned for solving gravitational harmonics in black hole clusters, happened to see the human post. Expecting something trivial, she skimmed the first problem. Her frills trembled. Her eyes dilated. She read it again. And again. She sat back in stunned silence. What am I looking at? The problem itself was not complex. At least, not in the way advanced quantum singularity mechanics were. The numbers were small. The equations elegant. And yet, something about the logic felt wrong. Not incorrect. Dangerous. The first attempts. Soon, the problem made its way through the Galactic Science Network. Mathematicians, physicists, and logicians across hundreds of species studied it. They couldn't solve it. Not because they lacked intelligence. These were beings whose minds operated across multiple dimensions of reality, whose neural structures could process calculations faster than human supercomputers. But the way the problem was structured, the underlying logic behind it, seemed to exist in a different framework of reality. One that no non-human species had ever considered before. This must be an error, declared Supreme Logician Vartak of the Zephyr Dominion. It is a joke, insisted Korthax the Unshackled, a warlord scientist of the Kavani Empire. Humans love their humor. This must be an elaborate deception. Yet, no matter how many times they analyzed it, the numbers remained. The relationships held. The proofs, if they could even be called that, stood unshaken. What began as curiosity turned into obsession. Entire research institutions dedicated themselves to deciphering the human problem. The first failure. One of the first species to attempt a direct proof was the Zentheri, crystalline beings who had perfected mathematical logic over thousands of years. Their minds were optimized for abstraction, their civilization built upon mathematical purity. They approached the problem systematically. They translated it into their own notation. They tested it against universal logical axioms. They ran simulation after simulation. Every answer was different. Every solution conflicted with the previous one. This was impossible. For a species that had never encountered contradiction in mathematics before, the very notion that a single human equation could produce multiple conflicting results was beyond comprehension. At first, the Zentheri dismissed it as a flaw in their computational matrices. Then, one by one, their greatest logicians began to disappear. Some retreated into isolation, refusing to speak, their crystalline bodies frozen in states of perfect logical stasis. Others collapsed into endless loops of thought, their minds trapped in recursive paradoxes. And then finally the Zentheri homeworld went silent. A distress signal was sent, 3 simple words in galactic standard. Numbers are broken. The spiral of madness. Panic began to spread. Species after species took their own approach to solving the problem. Every attempt ended in failure. The Draenax Coalition, a species known for their biocomputational intelligence, dedicated entire living think tanks to the issue. Their vast organic minds, capable of processing petabytes of data per second, sought to brute force the solution. They failed. The Zelvori, masters of astrophysical equations, attempted to reduce the problem into a geometric framework. They failed. The Kavani warlords, fearing that the problem was an encoded weapon, tried applying their strategic combat algorithms to crack its structure. They failed. The more the galaxy struggled to understand, the more they realized an unthinkable truth. The humans had access to a mathematical structure that no other species had even imagined. The contact attempt. At last, in sheer desperation, the Galactic Science Council sent an official delegation to Earth. A summit was held in Geneva, bringing together some of the greatest minds in the galaxy. On the human side, a single high school math teacher. Her name was Jessica Reynolds. She was 43 years old. She had a coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Teacher." She listened patiently as the galaxy's top scientific minds explained their crisis. She nodded thoughtfully, took notes, sipped her coffee. Then she picked up a marker and walked to the whiteboard. "All right, class. Let's go over this step by step." The assembled scholars, many of whom had ruled empires, crushed rebellions, and rewritten the laws of physics, sat silently as a human teacher began explaining fourth-grade algebra. They took notes. They asked questions. They struggled. And as they struggled, they came to a horrifying realization. Humans had never once assumed that math was easy. To them, mathematics was not an absolute truth to be discovered. It was a tool. A messy, imprecise, flawed tool that they had been wrestling with for centuries. Where other species had assumed numbers were a divine constant, humans had questioned their very existence. Where others had built entire civilizations on the idea of perfect logic, humans had accepted contradiction. The human mind did not break when confronted with paradox. It simply shrugged and moved on. The first lesson. By the end of the summit, the delegation of the greatest scientists in the galaxy sat in stunned silence. Jessica clapped her hands. "All right, now for homework." Corthax the Unshackled screamed. Harmonic Prime, the cybernetic overmind of the Zephyr Dominion, shut itself down to avoid the implications. Ericalin, one of the last surviving Zenthari logicians, simply sat down and wept. The problem had not been the math. The problem had been the galaxy's own assumptions. They had sought perfection. Humans had thrived in imperfection. And now, faced with the weight of their own ignorance, the galaxy realized that the true masters of mathematics had never been those who sought absolute knowledge. It was those who knew how to work through the chaos. The Great Homework Crisis, as it would later be known, was no longer an academic matter. It had become a galactic emergency. The first casualties. The collapse of the Zenthari had been only the beginning. As species after species failed to unravel the mysteries of human mathematics, the fallout spread like a cognitive virus. The triumvirate of Zelvori, a species whose minds operated on quantum logic, began experiencing philosophical recursion failures. Their leaders, once known for their unshakable reason, found themselves trapped in endless loops of paradox, questioning the very foundations of existence. The Draenax coalition, whose biocomputational minds once processed entire star system models, abandoned all numerical calculations. Their entire civilization renounced mathematics, declaring it a human corruption of reality. The Kavani warlords, once ruthless conquerors, dissolved their empire overnight. A single glance at human algebra had convinced them that all war strategy was meaningless. If humans could manipulate numbers like this, then no conflict could ever truly be predicted. And yet, the humans remained oblivious. The fear of the unknown. By this point, the Galactic Science Council had gone beyond mere confusion. They were afraid. If this was what human children were learning, what did their greatest minds know? The question spread like wildfire. The post-logicians of Harmonic Prime, a cybernetic collective whose entire species was built on mathematical perfection, went into lockdown. Their overmind, once a beacon of flawless calculation, sent out a single chilling transmission. Error, reality structure compromised. And then, they went silent. Entire research fleets were recalled from deep space exploration. The high empirical order of the Zephyr, who once claimed to have unraveled the fabric of spacetime itself, shut down all mathematical research indefinitely. No one wanted to go further. No one wanted to see what lay beyond the abyss of human thought. The ambassadors' demand. Desperate for answers, the Galactic Science Council sent an emergency delegation to the United Nations Scientific Assembly on Earth. They demanded an audience with humanity's top scientific minds. Instead, they were met by a high school principal. Her name was Miriam Dawson. She was 57 years old, wore a cardigan, and had perfected the infinitely disappointed teacher stare that could humble even the fiercest warlord. She listened patiently as the delegation of panicked alien scholars explained their plight. She frowned, adjusted her glasses, then sighed. "Are you telling me that the entire galactic community is falling apart over some middle school algebra?" A silence fell over the room. Professor Zatuk, an elder of the Zelvori Academy, spoke hesitantly. "Why, you mean, there is more?" Miriam gave them a long, slow look. "Sweetheart, that was just basic pre-algebra. The grand revelation." The delegation stared in silent horror. If this was merely the beginning, then what monstrous truths had humanity been hiding? Miriam stood and walked to a large whiteboard. She picked up a marker and, with the casual confidence of someone who had spent decades wrangling unruly students, began writing. "All right. Let's try something different. Let's talk about calculus." Harmonic Prime rebooted itself just to scream. Professor Zatuk collapsed to the floor. Ambassador Corthax, one of the last surviving strategists of the Kavane, fled the room outright. What the humans considered basic problem-solving, the galaxy saw as cosmic horror. Every equation she wrote felt like a glimpse into a hidden dimension, a realm of abstraction so deep that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of thought. She turned back to them, arms crossed. Still with me? They were not. They had tried so hard to comprehend human numbers. But humans hadn't just studied numbers. They had tamed them. Where other species saw mathematical truth as an unchanging law, humans saw it as a challenge to be overcome. The greatest empires of the galaxy had sought perfection. Humanity had embraced the infinite unknown. And now, for the first time, the galaxy was truly beginning to understand what that meant. Mathematics was not a discovery. It was a weapon. The Galactic Science Council had made a grave mistake. They had come to Earth seeking answers. Instead, they had opened a door they could never close. The breaking point. Miriam Dawson, a humble high school principal, had given the most brilliant minds in the galaxy their first true lesson in human mathematics. And in doing so, she had shattered their last illusion of certainty. The delegates had barely survived pre-algebra. They had collapsed under the weight of calculus. And yet, before they could retreat, before they could escape the nightmare of human logic, they heard the words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Would you like to see something truly advanced? Professor Zatuk, an elder of the Zelvori Academy, tried to protest. His mandibles clicked erratically, his species equivalent of a full-blown panic attack. Please, he rasped. No more. Miriam raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Because I haven't even mentioned. She turned and wrote two simple words on the board. Imaginary numbers. The collapse of reason. The screaming could be heard across the entire United Nations building. Harmonic Prime, the cybernetic overmind of the Zephyr Dominion, short-circuited itself again. The Kavani warlord Korthax physically attacked the whiteboard, his razor-sharp claws tearing into the surface as though he could erase the concept itself. The Draenax Coalition, once a proud species of biocomputational beings, vomited neural fluid in distress. The Zentheri, who had barely survived human algebra, simply ceased all communication. Because this was impossible. Numbers were supposed to be real. Numbers were supposed to represent truth. What in the name of the void was an imaginary number? Miriam Dawson, unfazed by the chaos around her, tapped the board with her marker. You see, class, sometimes equations don't give us neat, clean answers. Sometimes, numbers don't behave the way we expect them to. So we just... She smiled, invent new ones. The silence that followed was absolute. They had spent centuries trying to find absolute, immutable laws of reality. Humans had simply made up new numbers when they needed them. The forbidden knowledge spreads. The collapse of the Galactic Science Council should have ended it. They should have left Earth immediately. But the problem was already out. The knowledge had spread. Whispers of human mathematics leaked into the galactic academic network. The humans created a number that isn't real. They work with contradictions as if they are natural. They do not fear paradox. They wield it. At first, most of the galaxy dismissed it as a hoax. But then, the mathematicians started looking deeper. They found the human proofs. They saw the equations held. And the greatest realization of all? Imaginary numbers worked. They described quantum fluctuations perfectly. They predicted phenomena that no other mathematical framework could. They explained the chaotic structures of black holes, hyperspace distortions, and even the fluctuations of time itself. For the first time in galactic history, an entire scientific framework had been upended. Mathematics had never been a discovery. It had been an invention. And that meant, what else had humans created? The great cognitive uplift. Not all species broke under the weight of human knowledge. A select few saw opportunity. The Velmari, a species known for their intellectual adaptability, began integrating human logic into their systems. They abandoned their old axioms and embraced human-style problem-solving. The Draenax Coalition, once terrified of human numbers, started rewriting their biocomputational algorithms to include imaginary numbers. A faction within the Zentheri survivors formed the School of Contradiction, dedicated to understanding how humans thought. And for the first time, a terrifying possibility emerged. Perhaps humanity was not a threat to the galaxy. Perhaps humanity was the next step. The silent rebellion. But not everyone agreed. The old empires, the ones built on rigid, absolute truths, feared this new way of thinking. The Zephyr Dominion declared human mathematics forbidden knowledge. Any species found using human logic would be exiled from galactic society. The High Empirical Order of Zelvori issued a warning. The human mind is a disease. Their chaos must not be allowed to spread. And in the shadows, something far worse was forming. A coalition of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations began preparing for the unthinkable. If humanity could not be contained, then humanity had to be eliminated. The final warning. The Galactic Science Council had come to Earth seeking knowledge. Now they were leaving with a war on the horizon. The problem had never been human technology. The problem had never been human weapons. The problem had always been human thought. They could not predict it. They could not control it. They could not stop it. As the delegates fled Earth, retreating to the safety of their old ways of thinking, one final question remained unanswered. If this is what human children learn in school, what do their greatest minds know? The galaxy had faced wars. It had endured extinctions. It had survived cosmic disasters, black hole collapses, and supernovae that wiped entire civilizations from existence. But nothing, not a single catastrophe in recorded history, had ever unmade reality itself. Until now. Because human mathematics was spreading. And the galaxy's most powerful empires were desperate to stop it. The galactic purge begins. The high empirical order of Zelvori made the first move. They declared that any species caught practicing human-style mathematics would be exiled, imprisoned, or annihilated. They burned entire research stations. They erased archives. They purged their own scholars. But it was already too late. The knowledge had escaped. The school of contradiction had already begun uplifting entire species with human logic. The Draenax coalition had abandoned their fear of numbers and were rebuilding their society with human-inspired systems. The war was no longer about humans. It was about truth. The final confrontation. In a desperate attempt to stop the collapse of their old way of thinking, the Grand Alliance of Pure Logic launched a full-scale attack on Earth. 1,000 warships darkened the skies over the human homeworld. They did not come for conquest. They came to erase humanity from existence. They came to eliminate the source of the corruption. The United Nations gave them one last warning. You fear our knowledge. You fear the truth we have uncovered. But you have already lost. The galactic generals laughed. They had weapons that could tear through planetary defenses. They had fleets that had conquered entire star systems. What could humanity possibly do to stop them? The Great Surrender. And then Earth's defenses activated. But not in the way the invaders expected. There were no superweapons. There were no massive space fleets. There was no desperate last stand. Instead, human mathematicians opened their books. They released a single, final theorem into the galactic network. A theorem that had been hidden. A theorem so complex that no human child was ever taught it in school. The Grand Unified Equation. A proof that rewrote reality itself. The ships stopped moving. The weapons shut down. The AI battle systems collapsed under their own logic. The Grand Alliance of Pure Logic had prepared for war. They had not prepared for a fundamental rewrite of their entire understanding of existence. They fell without a single shot being fired. The truth revealed. As the most powerful fleets in the galaxy sat motionless, trapped in the paradox of human logic, the last survivors of the old way of thinking asked their final question. What are you? The answer came simple and undeniable. We are explorers. And the first thing we ever explored was knowledge itself. Humanity had never been bound by the limits of logic. Where other species saw absolute truths, humans saw challenges to be solved. Where others sought perfection, humans embraced contradiction. They had been feared as monsters. Instead, they were something far worse. They were creators. The new galactic order. In the aftermath, the galaxy changed forever. The civilizations that once rejected human thought now embraced it. The Draenax coalition built new biocomputers based on paradoxical logic. The Zenthari, once shattered, were reborn as a species dedicated to exploration. The Kavani warlords, who had once ruled by brute force, became scholars of contradiction, seeking knowledge instead of conquest. And the high empirical order of Zelvori? They simply vanished. Their last transmission contained only 2 words. We surrender. The last message. With the war over, Earth broadcasted a final message to the entire galaxy. A simple invitation. You feared our knowledge. But knowledge is meant to be shared. Come learn with us. And one by one, the civilizations of the galaxy accepted. The war had not been fought with weapons. It had been fought with understanding. And humanity had won. Final note. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to The Void Narratives. For more sci-fi, cosmic horror, and deep dives into the unknown, hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore the depths of the void. Because in the end, the greatest frontier is the one inside our own minds. Rocket subscribe now. The void awaits. Rocket.